All right, so here is my lesson plan for the case study. So the first thing that I would do is I would have Google Slides pulled up to actually be able for all the students to be able to go through the lesson, and that is best done through Google Chrome. So I've already pulled up my Nearpod lesson here, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn on the captions. So today we are going to be looking at one of the secondary sources for the research paper called Chapter 5, as seen on TV, Gender, Television, and Popular Culture by Jen Brandt. And I would go ahead and have the students log into Nearpod with the student paste link. So they would have that up on their screen, and this is the Google Slide screen that would be on the main projector at the front. So that way Dimple would be able to see what I'm saying with the Nearpod, but then she would also have the Nearpod pulled up on her own screen so that she could engage with the activity portion of the Nearpod lesson. So if I go to Nearpod here, I've already copied the link over. So she would go ahead and put her name in. And then this is what she would see on her screen in front of her, which is also the same thing that is displayed at the front of the classroom. All right, so the first thing that I would have students do is I would have them go through and answer questions about the book chapter. That's how I kind of break things down for the longer secondary sources, is to split them up in a sense so that we can work on the main arguments that are part of the secondary source. And this is kind of like a twofold activity because I'm giving them questions to answer from the book chapter, but I'm having them answer the questions using a direct quotation from the book chapter. So if I go back to Nearpod, and you can't see it all here, but if you go to Nearpod, they can see this part. So I tell them, and we had been practicing this prior to this lesson, so they know that direct quotes are supposed to have 4 component parts to them. They should have a lead-in with the last name of the author or the person who said it, with some kind of signal verb. They need the direct quotation itself from the secondary source. They need the in-text citation after the direct quote, which for this particular source would be a page number in parentheses, since this is a written secondary source. They would also need an explanation of the direct quote after it. And here I do give them a document that they can use, which is up on their Blackboard if they need help with the direct quotations. Usually by this point in the semester, the students are good with doing the direct quotes. They understand what I'm looking for with those, so it's usually not a problem. All right. So let's see, the first question is an open-ended question, and I believe for this lesson all the questions are open-ended. Now on Nearpod, they give you the option of either being able to do like shorter answer questions, which are on like a chalkboard where everyone in the class would see what everyone else said, or if you want them to answer questions that might be longer in length, you could use an open-ended question. So for example, this one says, what was the code of practices for television broadcasters? During what years was this code active? And then here I give them the page numbers to kind of help them find that section of the text. And then Dimple would be able to write her answer here, and then she would be able to submit it down here. And then on my screen at the front it shows me the names of all the students who are logged into the lesson, and once they share it, then I can turn back and share it with everyone else. So after this question was answered, then I can choose maybe a couple of student responses to share with everyone, and then they would see that response on their screen and they would be able to read it and we would be able to talk about it. And then we will move on to the next open-ended question. How were women depicted in early television? So the same thing. They would answer the question here and then share it, and then I can select which responses to put up on the screen. And ideally, I would like to share some of Dimple's responses with the class so that people could see what she was saying in written form. And then possibly if the interpreters or the need to help, like maybe translate some of that, then that's fine. But this way, she isn't having to rely on the translators to answer these questions from me verbally. She would be able to write out a response that I would be able to project for the whole class to see. And there are quite a few of these as well. How did Norman Lear influence television? What characteristics did Jiggle TV have? How did the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, change television in the early 1980s? How does television normalize trends? How are men portrayed on 2.5 Men? How are women portrayed on The Big Bang Theory? How does reality television create an opportunity for national dialogue on attitudes toward gender, race, and sexuality? And that question would be really important since they are doing a research paper that focuses on gender and popular culture. They are being asked to select 2 primary sources to analyze for their research paper, and their focus is gender. So this book chapter focused on television. So if they choose to do a television show episode as one of their primary sources in their research paper, then this book chapter, it would be an appropriate secondary source for them to cite in their research paper. Should television today have a code of conduct? If so, what codes or values should be addressed? So for all of these questions, I usually try to figure out how much time I think everyone needs. Even verbally, I might mention to them, you have this many minutes, but you definitely have to pay attention to that, because if you let it go too long, then it starts to drag on. And even like with as many questions here, depending on how much time I have, like if I taught this like this summer, I have more questions here than I would during a regular semester when we only have an hour and a half, an hour and 20 minutes. So this summer the classes were 2 hours, so I was able to make the lessons longer, which I actually like because we can kind of dig into the secondary sources more. But during the regular semester, when our classes are only an hour and 20 minutes, I might delete maybe half of these questions. I might leave 5 of them. And it's always about picking and choosing which questions you want them to answer. But we want to get a classroom dialogue going about the chapter, because that's our focus here. One of our focuses is to analyze the book chapter so that they're clear about what the book chapter, the secondary source, is saying, so that they can use it possibly in their research paper. So here you've got the analyzing the book chapter learning goal, and you've also got, again, the answers to the questions here. So their questions are coming in the form of direct quotations, so they're getting a lot of practice with being able to cite things from a secondary source. And I believe that's the last question. So here I'm actually going to go through. Okay, so here it shows answer here. So I'm just going to scroll through these questions. All right, the nuclear family archetype. So now I'm giving some specific information that relates to the one of the skills that I want them to work on for this particular class, which is looking at a episode from a television show series. So here, and this information was in the book chapter about the nuclear family archetype. In her book chapter, Brandt discusses the golden age of television that started in the 1950s and lasted through the 1960s. She talks about this nuclear family archetype. An archetype is similar to an ideal example of something. The ideal nuclear family looks something like this. Leave It to Beaver from the 1950s. So we might talk about this picture a little bit, and I might ask them questions about, well, what do you notice in the picture? What type of people do we have here? It looks like a mom and a dad and two smiling children. What do we know about the dad just from looking at this picture? What can we assume about the mother from looking at this picture? So hopefully they pick up on the fact that the dad is employed because he's wearing a suit and tie, and that the mom is probably a stay-at-home mom. And those were very typical depictions of men and women or families on television during the golden age of television, which was when television first started. Here I give some characteristics of the nuclear family. They were typically white, middle to upper class, heterosexual. The dad was usually the breadwinner and worked outside the home. He was seen as a figure of authority and reason. And then you usually had a stay-at-home mom who worked inside the home. And the mom was often seen as a figure that was emotional, sometimes childish, and submissive. And there were usually two smiling and obedient children. Now, from the Leave It to Beaver picture, we saw two boys, but typically you might have a boy and a girl. But that was the nuclear family. All right, so today that you are going to watch an episode of The Twilight Zone from the early 1960s. So while they watch this episode, I want them to pay attention to the family that is presented in the episode. I want them to think about how this family does or does not represent the nuclear family archetype that Brandt describes in her book chapter. I would ask them to see if they could pinpoint characteristics of the family that matches up to Brandt's definition of the nuclear family. I would also want them to pay careful attention to the visual images as well as the dialogue while they watch, which is very important because if any students choose a television show episode as one of their primary sources in their research paper, then those are the kinds of things that I would want them to be analyzing in their research paper. What images did you see in the television show? Give me a couple lines of dialogue from the episode that relate to whichever character you are analyzing from that television show episode. So this activity really prepares them for the research paper because this is giving them practice with analyzing a specific primary source. And that is what they are required to do in their research paper. They have to select two different types of primary sources and then analyze them using information from the secondary sources. So here they're going to be watching an episode of The Twilight Zone, and then they are going to write about that episode or analyze it using information from the Jen Brandt book chapter. Specifically the information that she relays about the nuclear family archetype. All right, so if I go back to my Nearpod, okay, television show episodes present one type of primary source that you might analyze in your research paper. Therefore, you need to practice analyzing television show episodes using an appropriate secondary source. So here I want them to use the directions that I've attached to this activity and to write one paragraph, about 10 to 12 sentences, in which they analyze the Living Doll television show episode of The Twilight Zone that we would watch in class, using appropriate information from the Brant book chapter. So this is the culminating activity for the actual class session. So if I click on the PDF here, these are the directions for the assignment. So I always get very specific with the directions. So here I'm repeating what it said over here on the Nearpod, but it's much more specific. I give them information about their topic sentence. A lot of times they need help starting the paragraphs. So I will give them some advice about what to include in the topic sentence, and I do ask them to make one clear and concise main point about whether or not the family depicted in the television show episode does or does not represent the nuclear family archetype that Brant discusses in her book chapter. And then in the body of that paragraph, I'm asking them to pull out 2 direct quotations from the Brant book chapter to support the main point in their paragraph, which is what we did at the beginning of the lesson. We worked with the direct quotations. So here I'm asking them to, again, practice getting direct quotations into their analysis paragraphs. And then here I give them, repeat the information about the component parts of the direct quotations. And down here, I reiterate to them to include specific plot details from the episode. So specific references to visual images, a specific line or two of dialogue from the episode, to explain or elaborate on the direct quotations that they use. So one thing that we talk about all semester is you don't want to include a direct quote and then just leave it there. That's like a hit and run quote. Whenever you cite something, you always want to follow it up. You want to explain it right away, because you can't assume that the reader understands the meaning of the quote. So we work a lot on that, like always explaining your direct quotes or elaborating on them right away. So this assignment, here are the directions for the actual assignment, and they can have this pulled up on their screen in front of them. And if they go back to Nearpod, this is where they are composing their answer to that. And then I would go ahead and pull up the episode of Living Doll from the Twilight Zone. So if I go into my Blackboard, and I usually always have this screen pulled up already, so it's easy to access. So I go to my course media, and I scroll down here. This is where I've got all of my media located. So I'm going to go to the Twilight Zone Living Doll episode. And this is where I can start the episode. So here you notice it starts. So down here you notice, and this is done through Kaltura Capture, the closed captioning button. So as soon as I start this video, I'm going to go ahead and click the closed captioning, and that will pull up the subtitles on the screen. That way Dimple would be able to follow along with the episode and not have to rely on the interpreters to sign everything that's said during the episode. All right, so what's going on with my closed captioning? I mean, it does work. I'm not quite sure why it's not. I'm wondering if because I'm recording in Kaltura right now, that it's not pulling up the closed captioning for this, but it does work. So this closed captioning button does work. So on my main screen, I just click it and they would be able to see that. But the people at the technology Blackboard people, they were really great about doing all my videos for me. So, and they actually show me how to do them through Kaltura itself. So, I mean, I can always, if I want to record videos, I can always go through my own videos and do the closed captioning myself. That is something that's really nice about Kaltura Capture, is that you can actually caption things on your own. They have an automatic system that does it, but sometimes it doesn't get all the words right. So you can actually scroll through and look and go in and change some of the things that were said, or you can completely do the captions yourself from scratch. So it's really an awesome tool, and I mean very beneficial for my class, because Dimple would not be able to understand this episode except through the interpreters. So the fact that this video is already closed captioned, that's perfect. I mean, she would have no problem at all being able to follow along with the episode. So there, I mean, the episode's about 25 minutes long. They usually always love this episode. It's a very interesting story, but I guess that would be one thing that I would want to possibly figure out about this particular about this right here. About, like, okay, so if I'm recording in Kaltura, um, if I'm recording the video to save later to upload to the students, like, so how does that work? So that is something that I would want to inquire about with the Blackboard people, because yeah, normally the closed caption, you hit it and it's working. So I think that because I'm recording myself right now through Kaltura, that it's causing maybe a miscommunication with the closed captioning button. Um, but anyways, all right, so that's the episode. And then if I go back to, my Google Chrome, so during the episode, I would definitely want them to be taking notes about what they see. That way they could go back and write their paragraph here, and submit it to the lesson. And that basically is all of the lesson. So you can see how it works. So yeah, so here you can see it's pulled up. So, but overall, I think that it's a very good lesson for someone who is hearing impaired. I think that Dimple would be able to learn all of the material through Nearpod and through the closed captioning, and even with the Google Slides here, this part of it, she's able to see everything that I'm saying that is connected through the actual Nearpod lesson, so there's not a disconnect there. And then she has all the stuff from Nearpod written in front of her. So really, I feel like this would help her not to have to rely so much on the interpreters, because of the way that I've adapted the materials to help her with the specific learning goals or the specific learning skills for this particular lesson or this particular class session. And then this, through Kaltura, I can upload this later to Blackboard for note taking purposes. So if she forgets something that we talked about, or any of the students forget about something that we did, they would have access to the Kaltura video of the lesson on Blackboard. So what I might do is have like a folder on their Blackboard course shell that says in-class activities, and then list each week and the days of the week, and then that would be their go-to spot for the actual things that we did in class for the day. So if someone was even absent during one day, and I know Dimple actually happened to be absent a couple of times this summer, she would be able to go into those folders and find the actual video of what we did. So that means you're keeping yourself up with the class even when you're not there. But by no means would I want them to rely on that as a way of like never coming to class, because it's always going to be up there for you to refer to. But for someone like her, I think that it would be a very valuable tool. So I think that that's everything. So they would submit their analysis paragraph here, and yes, that's the end of the lesson. But I think that the combination of Nearpod and Google Slides and Kaltura Capture and the closed captioning, I think it would be extremely beneficial to Dimple. And after looking at her specific needs, I like the way that I kind of pulled all of those assistive technology tools into one lesson. And I don't feel like it's overload. I know if you try to do too many tools, things can start to get messy. But I thought that this worked out really well. So I'm excited to try it in future semesters to see how it works. So hopefully you were able to follow along with everything, and that's all.